Hello everyone. Let's start our next session on supply contracts. So supply contracts is I would say the building block of any supplier buyer relationships, right? It can be even supplier end customer or the contracts which we sign while buying any product, we get the bills, we get the warranty, guarantees, they're also kind of contracts. But here we are going to address supply contracts predominantly between supplier and buyer, right? You can say in B2B environment. So when we talk about contracts, why we need contracts? Because as we have seen all across the course that supply chain entities, suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, so these entities, if we would see what is the current era, so to focus on their core competency, the companies are more relying on, outsourcing partners, or they are outsourcing more and more activities these days. So this actually, put more reliance on suppliers, as we have been emphasizing in this course. The other thing is that everyone in the supply chain, they just want to get rid of inventory or maybe all other inefficiencies, and because of that, every now and then, there would be some strategy, just in time vendor managed inventory, where the focus is more on how to remove inefficiencies in the supply chain system. So that is a good, these are the good strategies in one aspect, but those strategies actually, bring more and more challenges in governing the relationship and executing, such strategies in some formal manner, which, in future would not result into conflicting situations, right, or any disputes. So to avoid such thing, to avoid uh, any future unpleasant event to occur between supplier and buyer, and for the smooth functioning of, supplier and buyer, it is very important these days, to have supply contracts in place. So some kind of contracts in place. Now what is contract first? It is just like terms and conditions these days. Whenever we go for some cloud space license or any subscription, we just sign terms and condition. It's very much like that. uh, from this terms and conditions in itself is clear that, somehow these are kind of guidelines, or some kind of, regulations which help in smooth relationship of supplier and buyer. So as we have said that, it is the terms and conditions for the parties, right, to be agreed on to conduct business. It's very important, the entities, the entities who want to form a contract or who want to sign the contract, they must agreed on to conduct business. Okay, this is a conflict resolving mechanism, right? Though, every entity is very watchful, very careful while searching for a supplier, but still, there are many unforeseen events or occurrence occur, during the course of, supplier buyer relationship. So how to prevent, such conflicting situation, or if this is not preventable, how to resolve the situations, so that can also be covered in the contracts. Okay, that's how we say it regulates future action, right? If we are prepared that, suppose something goes wrong in future, what are the possibilities we should address, which is mutually agreeable to both the parties signing the contract. It actually helps in smooth transaction of, whole relationship. So it also defines the type of relationship. Okay, so what kind of relationship supplier buyer can have, this contract terms and condition can also help in. And definitely the main focus, main aim is to facilitate future mutual benefits, to all the parties. So this is in nutshell we can say that these are the terms and conditions mutually agreeable to all the parties, right? And to have a proper mechanisms to resolve any issues which can crop up in future. So we can actually summarize our contract like that. So what are the attributes of contract? It is definitely established by a legal counsel, right? Because once both party sign the contract, it becomes a legally bound contract, right? So it is very important, while developing the contract, some legal counseling should be done within an organization. These days every organization have their legal counsels, so it is established by them, it is prepared. So many a times you will see that companies, they come up with contracts which are more or less standardized and general, but at the same time there are few clauses which have to be modified based on what types of product we are procuring, what type of services we are procuring, right? We have seen that companies are now outsourcing, so most of the products and services which earlier companies would prefer to either manufacture inside or they would develop inside, now they are going for outsourcing. So with that more is the need of some kind of document which can prevent us from any conflicting situation. So uh, it has to be modified. As we have already seen, every company, every organization has different kind of needs. Okay, so if needs are different, types of needs, types of products or services are different, so has to be the contract. So this is very important. This differ by the products and services. These are also differ by the suppliers. What kind of suppliers we are looking for? Is it very specialized supplier or supplier selling us very unique product, right? Unique technology, or it is a day-to-day supplier, right? So a day-to-day product usage of supplier, or maybe the C item supplier, right? Or the spare parts. So based on the supplier, whether we are going for single supplier or supplier is a monopoly in the market. So based on the type of supplier we are dealing with, the contract differs with that. So what is the prerequisite? Clear understanding of terminology. It is very important that supplier and buyer have clear understanding of terminology to be used, to be written in the contract. We should be clear about the requirements, expectation, and what are the measures. So more these things are clearly negotiated, right? Or clearly expressed at the time of negotiation. Generally, we say that right negotiation with right measures, with the right terminologies, with the right expectations, that would come out to be a good effective contract, and it would be easy to implement. So this prerequisite is very important. So companies can, take inputs from the negotiation, but then they should do the negotiation in right manner. Understanding that contracts are developed for mutual benefits. This is very important. As we have already seen in the last slide also, it is important to have, main aim of the contract is that, it should be mutually beneficial. And some standard terms and conditions to all contracts and purchase agreement are common, right? So that we will see, we always also call it as boilerplate. So this is certain attributes of contract, right? Predominantly, like, when we say prepared for modified based on types of products and services, that means, like, we have to clearly know the scope, what we are buying, how much we are buying, what is the specification of this thing, clear terminology and requirement. So we should know what technology we are going to procure. So around that, what are the elements of contract, or how a contract structure, how the contract look like. So the contract is always starts with introduction. Under introduction, the names of the parties with complete addresses of their organizations. So a contract generally start with this introduction, right? And then comes the clauses. So In the clauses, like there are many number of clauses, right? We will see what are those clauses, right? But before uh, before writing the clauses, it is very important to know the schedules. Okay, what are the schedules? These are the specific details of clauses, right? So in clauses, when we would write clauses, we don't have the space, to specify or to give details of, certain aspects, like, statement of worker, statement of work, and if we want to mention the pricing, what pricing formula we are going to use, right, or supplier is going to use, right? So all these details, if some schedules, like, working schedules, time schedules have to be mentioned, how we define them, all this additional information, right, which supports the clause. That's why while writing the clause, before that one has to be clear about the schedule, right? So though, schedules will be positioned after the clauses in a contract structure, but, don't forget to mention, to give details about each clause if required in the schedule. So that means, like, the clauses, like, are written keeping in mind the details would be provided in schedule, right? For example, specific method, metrics and deliverables, right? For example, what method we would use, right? So if that method, can we define the method clearly? Can we define the metrics clearly? Like, if we are saying, for example, in the class we will have supply and delivery, one can say that, the product should be delivered as according to agreed upon indicators, right? So what are those indicators? How we define those indicators? Probably those details will be in the schedules, right? For example, so delivery related schedules can be like, delivery will be measured when the product would start from supplier premises, right? And when that would be intimated to us until it reaches to the customer, right? And or maybe the buyer premises within 10 days, or like, on an average of 10 days. This is how, we define, how we are going to measure the delivery parameters, right? So that can be written in the schedules. So it's very important to clearly define metrics, how we are going to measure those metrics, what are the deliverables. So those are the position under the schedule. And also these can be placed as appendices at the end of the contract. So what we want to say is that, the clauses would be driven by the schedules, right? Or we can say we would support the clauses with the schedules uh, at the end here, with under the appendices, right? And then, comes the clauses. So clauses will be there, for the scope of agreement, it will be there for purchase order, supply and delivery, specification, payment, there can be other, health safety, right, arbitration, um, uh, and many other indicators, like, which might be required. So we will see that what all elements in the contracts are there, right? What are the elements now? We need to identify and describe clearly what to be bought, okay, and at what cost, right? With this, we have been, like, emphasizing in this course that we have to be clearly known what we expect, so that, we can clearly define what product we want or what service we want. Can we define the scope? We cannot say that, we cannot have, I want, a table from the furniture shop, that doesn't mean that, you can use the same contract to buy the chair by default. It is not possible. One has to define the scope very clearly and the purchase order in the contract elements, right? Many a times, the conflict comes, like, the supply chain parties, they think that, it is obvious, if I would get product 1, product 2 automatically will be given as per the same contract guidelines. So this is a mistake. So if you want to do that, it should be clearly defined in the scope. So scope has to be clearly defined Purchase order is a document which actually carries all the specifications around the product. Okay, so these two documents can be very useful in identifying and describing the product or the service clearly. Then comes shipment and delivery, how the product would be shipped, right? So what kind of shippers will be used, what kind of third party logistics providers will be used, like how to monitor them, right? What are the delivery conditions, the details can be given in the schedules. But here it is very important to mention in the clause that what if shipments would be late, what if delivery will not be according to the buyer's expectation or according to the agreed upon indicators. There should be installation related details if we are dealing with the technology product, right? Or the product which needs to be installed at buyer's premises. Who would install it, within what duration it would be installed, do they need any other inputs, do they need any other resources? So all details are to be uh, mentioned in the clause, right? The other aspect in the clause is related to acceptance, like how we accept, how the buyer would accept the product, right? So obviously when we say acceptance, the main thing is the quality, right? So what are the consideration, what should be our inspection standards? Okay, so how would we ensure about quality, right? This should be mentioned in the clause, what specification, quality, right, of the product. At the same time, if something related to health, ethics, health and hygiene, safety of the workers have to be there. As we have seen in the past, these days, it is about the reputation of each supply chain entity which is eventually serving to the end customer. So it is the duty of every entity to ensure that the suppliers are also following the health and safety, the ethics, the sustainability considerations. So how we can bring that, how we would ensure that? One way out is to bring it in the clauses. Okay, so the health, safety, hygiene, the well-being of workers are very well taken care of in supplier premises. This must be mentioned in the clauses, right? Then suitable warranties should be very clear. What if the product would go faulty or something wrong would happen? What is the provision here? Payments are very important, right? What are the payment conditions we have? Is there any provision for having some kind of contracts here, contracts for the payment schedules, like and maybe the payment amounts, right? Everything has to be clearly mentioned. Okay, for example, payments would be done within 10 to 20 days of the date of delivery. This is very, very important statements to be mentioned, right? So once we receive the product, the buyer mentioned one can mention, once we receive the product, the payment would be done by this mode, right? Uh, and by this date or within this many days. So this is very important clause. The moment we say payments, the related clause can be like how to deal with third party members. Okay, third party members can be the banks or other financial institutions which help in facilitating the transactions. So clear clauses should be there for that also. So the payment related thing, very important, is performance based, right? So how we measure performance, right? Whether the performance is based on technology improvement, right? So how suppliers will ensure that they are putting sufficient effort in either innovating, or the innovation can be in terms of technology, or innovation can be in terms of improvising the process for cost reduction, right? Because any provision or any effort in terms of reducing cost will be eventually transformed into price reduction for the buyer. So this is very important. Is this contract related to a project like R&D project, research and design project, where one has to give a full scope of for a supplier to take risk, especially for drugs, new drug discovery or new technology, like, in that, one has to give, good support, to the supplier for taking risk. So in that case, if supplier would be compensated well, right? So the compensation to the supplier for taking risk, but at the same time in a very watchful manner, right? All those clauses can be mentioned here. At the same time, what if performance is not up to the mark, not up to the expectation? What should be the consequences? Whether the consequences will be in terms of penalty, right? Or whether the consequences will be in terms of reducing the order, right? Or, or some other term that has to be clearly mentioned, like, for example, consequences for late delivery, right? Or consequences of, insufficient quantity delivered, right? Or bad quality products, more defects coming, right? So this is very important. Now the moment we say the performance, so in case something goes wrong, who would be liable for that? So this has to be clearly mentioned, that who would be liable if things goes wrong, right? At the same time, this is very important these days. We have just, like, experienced, the very disastrous situation which happens once in 100 years, right? COVID situation that has led, companies to become more conscious and more inclusive of, this force majeure clause, right? Like, if something goes wrong, uh, unforeseen activity happen which would prevent the supplier to perform, as expected, then this force majeure clauses will be, like, enforced. For example, during COVID, most of the factories were shut, right? So when most of the factories were shut, they cannot make something, they cannot supply. So during COVID-19, we this clause can be activated. This cannot be, this cannot be run, in a similar situation of normal time. So this is the, this is called force majeure clause. This is implemented in case, we have some disruption, some earthquake or some natural disruption has occurred in some place. That point of time also, it would, supplier won't be able to supply the products. So those clauses should definitely be mentioned here, just to safeguard, certain conditions, right? Another important thing is confidentiality and intellectual property, right? So every supplier and buyer, right, they have to write the confidentiality agreement. So for example, if supplier and buyer, they are working on a very confidential or a very for example, any government project, or, like defense and or very sophisticated technology which have to be kept confidential. So these clauses have to be mentioned. At the same time, there is always a risk, the supplier is not supplier to your organization, the supplier is supplier to your competitor also. So many a times, like, if we are procuring designs, right, design of product from suppliers, so which are, like, sometimes we provide designs, right? So companies provide designs to the supplier, which is a very unique feature of, that product. So in such case, it is required from the supplier, to maintain the confidentiality, so by not leaking, things to the competitor. So this is very important to be incorporated. At the same time, this era is, like, of startups, of all the new innovative uh, products are coming up. So are the challenges that, if new product, new technology will come, how to share this intellectual property rights, who would own this IPR? So this has to be clear at the time of contract. Very important thing, despite companies take care of each and every uh, condition, each and they, even if they enumerate all the possible future events which can go wrong, right? And despite careful attention listing all these conflicting issues and considering that into contract, the companies still get into conflicting situations. So in that case, if we have good dispute resolution related contracts, that would be very good for both the parties to resolve the issue timely and by following proper way, right? Because all companies are very well aware of this thing, that any lawsuits will actually result in more cost and more time spending on that. So what are the other possibilities one can have? So for example, arbitration. So but if that is a possibility, how two parties would exercise this arbitration, that has to be mentioned in the contract. So generally, how this disputes, like contractual disputes, how one can resolve. So this should there are two extremes, like should we mention each and every clause, or we should develop contracts in such a manner that the contract should take care of every clause, so that we can which can prevent the dispute, right? But at the other end, we might have extreme condition where we have to take legal action. But we have some non-legal action, right, where we can take some mediation, we can request third party right to come, and there can be different models companies, two parties can use, how they can resolve the conflict, either using third party, or go for arbitration where impartial third party can be utilized, right? Where this third party can give impartial point of view by keeping the interest of both parties, right, to the dispute. So the interest of both parties should be protected, right? And obviously one has to use outside arbitrator, that is again the third party. So when the clause for arbitration is written, right, so because it is an impartial point, so one has to be very clear in mentioning that how to choose an appropriate arbitrator, understanding of different types of disputes, like dispute can be on the price, dispute can be on the delivery, dispute can be on the behavior. So there can be many aspects. It is better if parties have understanding of what kind of disputes can happen, so then can arbitration be considered for a particular type of dispute. So when we look at arbitration, or when we look at the contract, the other aspects are like, when the contracts are written by international parties, like when a one party develops a contract with the foreign supplier or foreign buyer, right, then there are many other aspects one has to bring in, like that is also very much related to conflict resolution only, but because as long as everything going smooth, there is no problem, right? But when some conflicting situation happens, then so what law would govern to resolve this issue, which court would address that issue, what kind of arbitrators will be helpful in an international setting, right? What should be the language used, so all those aspects also become very important. Those becomes additional clauses when one moves to the international contracts, or the contracts dealing uh, with the foreign supplier or foreign buyers. So these are in nutshell, defining the contract, writing the contract, developing the contract. So if contract is written like meticulously, with the due diligence, it is very well said by Lewis Brown that it usually costs less to avoid getting into trouble than to pay for getting out of trouble. So keep in mind all those contract clauses, right, and to write a very exclusive exhaustive contract, so that one can avoid all the future disputes or conflicting situations from happening. Thank you.